podcast that you're listening to is being presented to you with the cooperation of the SJ Network. If you're a person who needs a publicist and you want to appear on podcasts, contact Stephen Joyner at s-j-network.com. Let's get on with the show.
I'm so hungry, I could eat your watch.
But that would be time-consuming. Better yet, let's listen to the Sherpa's interview with Ellen Bossig of the Hungry Trilobyte.
Attention, rebels of the Sherpalution. Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. We would like to give you a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial simply by heading to www.audibletrial.com/Sherpa. There are over 180,000 titles of audiobooks and podcasts, including this one, to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. And now, the one and only Mr. Bruce will lead you into the Sherpa Chalet. As a reminder, since the Sherpa is a man of questionable taste, many of the foods sold in our cafeteria will be also.
Welcome to Too Many Podcasts, the podcast about podcasts. Now, podcasting from the Sherpa Chalet on Mount Podcastia, here's your host, Jim, the podcast Sherpa.
Hello there, rebels of the Sherpalution. Welcome to another episode of Too Many Podcasts. It is me, Jim, the podcast Sherpa, your personal podcast Sherpa, leading you through the mountains of Podcastia. And we've got another podcast to talk about with our guest today.
Who's our guest today, Sherpa?
His name is Ellen Bossig, and I don't know if that name sounds familiar to you, but he's actually been a part of the SJ Network for quite some time. I know he's been a big help to the wonderful publicist extraordinaire, Stephen Joyner, but he's got a podcast of his own, and it's called The Hungry Trilobyte. So I sat down with Aaron, and he's a really interesting guy. He used to review movies, and he's big on sci-fi, and we got to talk about a lot of movies and got to know the guy. He's a lot of fun. And you also get to learn what a hungry trilobite is as well. So I bet you weren't expecting that either, were you? So let's have a listen to my conversation with Ellen Bossig of the Hungry Trilobyte. Hello there, rebels. We are in the Hungry Trilobyte room because we are with the host of the podcast, the Hungry Trilobyte. His name is Ellen Bossig, coming to us from the middle of America, somewhere behind the prairie, or I don't know what else is there. What else is there, Aaron? Welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you, Jim. Good evening. And there's a heck of a lot of grass out this way. That's why they call it the grass. Yes. You stand on a six-pack and way back home.
Okay. What is that song? Where the wind comes shining on the plains, right?
Yes. If you're a fan of musicals, you know it well.
That's right. You know, we were just saying that we've kind of done some things together, but we've never actually had a one-on-one conversation.
That's the way the internet works sometimes. We have so many communities and contacts that we might never have seen face-to-face, but this is just the way we do things these days.
Very true, very true. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Well, I am, like you said, I live in Oklahoma. I am a sci-fi fanatic. I am a podcaster and a writer as well. And generally, I like to get people together on the internet in some way, shape, or form. I like to find the way people make their lives better through the things they love.
I like that. And that's the purpose of the Hungry Trilobite?
It is. You can actually see, if you listen or watch the first episode, I'm sitting down with a very, very good friend of mine named Jerry Bennett, who is an artist in the area. And you can see me figure out why I do this, why I wanted to do it, what everything is going to be about in that moment. Because I say to him, I'm sitting down here talking to you, a comic book artist, but I'm not here because you're an artist. I'm here because you're a really cool guy. And you're a cool guy a lot of times because of the things you're into, because you took it to the next level. And that's what makes me interested in having the conversation.
That's no better reason to have a podcast for doing that.
I like to think so.
So what got you started on being interested in podcasting?
Okay. I was into podcasting very, very early on. I listened to my first podcast after getting my iPod in, I want to say it was 2007. So it wasn't the first day of podcasting, but it was pretty darn close. Mm-hmm. And I discovered that there was this powerful format where people could connect entire programs to anybody on the planet. And all they had to do was push a button. It didn't matter where their content was coming from, who it was going to. You could connect it with the people who cared about it. And, I was a big fan of using the internet for communicating ideas, for sharing knowledge. And this was the next step beyond the web. This was the next step beyond blogs and beyond web pages. And YouTube was taking off as well. That was its own thing. But I think podcasting, in my estimation, was better.
How'd you come up with the name Hungry Trilobyte? Now, Trilobyte it's an extinct animal, isn't it?
It is. And it's a layered reference. First of all, it's a cute critter, and I like cute critters. But it's also, like you said, it's extinct. And I'm not that young myself. I'm like in my 40s, which is, I'm not collecting Social Security. But you know what? I've been around a couple times, and I want to reach out to other people who have extended experience and to people who are just arriving on the scene and might want somebody friendly to walk with them and show them around and make it a welcome experience. Because I think exchanging perspectives in both directions is valuable. And the hungry part comes from the fact that I get hungry. But more to the point, I think we're all hungry for content of substance. We're hungry for something real.
When you first started doing this, did you know the direction that you were going to go in? I mean, did you have the background of being a writer already, or had you previously written?
I had written. I started off way back in college doing DVD reviews on the internet. Most of those are gone now because the website that hosted them went defunct, but there's still a few archives out there if you know where to look. Got into doing some scripts, did some riffing. I actually have a few entries on the rifftracks.com website. They're buried deep in the archives, but they're there as well. And I repurposed a lot of that stuff on my YouTube channel just in case you want to see something I've done. It's a bit dated now. I'd like to think I've grown since then, but I put it up there because I was proud to have done it.
The sci-fi thing, has that been with you all your life since you were a kid?
Yeah, ever since I can remember. I remember watching Ghostbusters at like 5. I remember watching Superman at about the same time. Got to Star Trek just slightly later. And those things have just built with me ever since.
What was it that did it for you, that flipped the switch? Was there a specific movie or a book or anything like that?
It was probably a combination of Ghostbusters and Back to the Future. I thought they were really neat ideas. They weren't like anything else that I could see on TV. It wasn't like anything that my folks would watch. It was something that appealed right to me. And, I'm right in that age group where I was very young, and a lot of my peers kind of felt the same way. It was a shared experience we all had, or at least a lot of our friends had.
When you first started doing the podcast again, and you realize that, you're reaching out to fellow fans. Do you find like a common bond with your listeners or anything like that along those lines when you're discussing stuff?
Absolutely. And that's a good reason to do it, because you're seeing, when I started going to conventions, when I started finding other people in real life, I started realizing there was this whole community there of people who were, they would get together having very little in common other than the fact that they liked this stuff. They had it in common. And I would tell people ask me, why would you go to these things? What's so much fun about it? I'm like, you will always eat dinner with people you didn't know at lunch. You get those connections right away. It's that kind of low pressure, high trust, secure atmosphere where people are just like, hey, I like this, you like that. And it's not even always positive necessarily. Sometimes it's the negative stuff can make you bond just as well. I've known people who use their found friendships in their fandom to overcome addictions, to get out of bad situations, or to inspire themselves to get in shape, deal with mental health issues. A lot of the good comes with the bad.
Is it safe to say that you're not team Star Wars or Star Trek? You like them both? I'm going to go on a limb here.
I'm going to watch anything you put in front of me. I might like it for different reasons, but I like all of it.
You said that you used to write DVD reviews on the internet. Mm-hmm. Just sci-fi or anything?
Anything that would show up. I would the site I worked with would get a lot of screeners, and they prided themselves on reaching out and finding material that would work for anybody. They would find somebody who could review it fairly, even though they got some really, really funky stuff. So I would just, and I have to stress, this was in 2001 to 2005 when DVD was still a very young market. Mm-hmm. And companies were just starting to figure out, oh, there's money to be made on this. We can take stuff out of our back catalog, throw it on a disc, and some idiot will buy it. And the idiot didn't have to pay for it. So that was nice. But I would look at this and people would be like, some alien documentary from way back when. I like, okay, who would want to watch this and why? And I would try to judge it based on what that person would want to get out of it, not necessarily what I would want to get out of it. Sometimes I'd get something cool, but sometimes I just had to roll with it.
Okay, so these weren't like necessarily major releases. They could just be like back catalog things that might have been like a little bit obscure. Do you have any personal favorites from those back catalogs? Absolutely.
I still have a bunch of movies that I have just because I found them in that assortment and I fell in love with them. There was one called Three Businessmen, which it's British style movie of these two guys. And yes, I know the movie's called Three Businessmen. There's two guys, work with me here.
Okay.
that are looking for dinner and they get lost and they spend the rest of their time trying to find out what's going on, why they keep getting lost. And it's the most bizarre, cerebral adventure you could possibly have. And the great thing is you don't actually understand anything about the movie until 10 seconds before the credits roll. But if you see the credits roll and you get the joke, and it is kind of a joke, it clicks and it is so worth it. And I will not spoil it for anybody. It's not the easiest movie to find right now, but it's called Three Businessmen. Check it out.
Were any of these movies, did they feature any actors who were famous or would later become famous? Did you?
Oh, yeah. And I did get a couple of good movies. I had a really good Kevin Spacey, Judi Dench movie called The Shipping News. Came into a Wilson Cruz movie called Joyride, which also had Adam West and Tobey Maguire in it. And these people were already at least somewhat famous at that point. It's just not their most known work, but I'm glad I found it.
Were there any of these DVDs that you saw that you had to give that you ended up giving like such a savage review because it was just like, no, I can't do it? Or did you try and be objective?
No, I was always I tried to be objective, but I would also, with objectivity comes the fact that you could show this movie to 1,000 people and you'd be lucky to find one that actually enjoyed it. Sometimes that's being objective, honestly.
Did you maybe have to go out on a limb well, you might like this movie if you're a conspiracy theorist and you walk around with a foil hat on your head? And
there was a 1950s period movie that was just so god awful. The only reason I finished it was because it was my job to watch it. I can't even remember the name of it any now, but it was terrible. I completely tore it apart. I mean, the end of it, there's a drag race and they end up hitting the girl's brother who's in a wheelchair and it sends the wheelchair over a cliff.
Oh no.
And me describing that makes it sound like a much better scene than it really is.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
I don't even remember. And yet I felt that movie truly deserved to be torn apart. There was another movie called Meat Market, which was a zombie movie just when that was starting to be a really popular thing.
Okay.
And I had words about the movie, but I approached it from the perspective of this is a fun movie. I like it. I like the fact that it is cheaply done. I like the fact that the effects are hokey. The story is silly because that's the kind of movie I want right now. And I think anybody watching it would want that. In looking up my review, I accidentally found the director posting on some forum about how I apparently hated him and wanted him dead. And it's like, no, I don't. I just thought you made a silly movie. I was calling it a silly movie. There's just no hatred here. Buddy, I'm sorry, really.
Well, I guess you published it. You are trashing my masterpiece. How could you, sir? How could you?
Yeah. Everybody was like, wow, you didn't get the movie. No, I got it. It was silly. Yeah, I don't think I wasn't having to deconstruct the usual suspects here. Okay.
And we do need silly movies every once in a while. We can't always just sit through movies that, where you have to think about it for 3 hours after you're walking out. Like, what was I just watching? Was it a deeper meaning? When he said, I will be seeing you soon, what was that? Sometimes it's just, you need like a movie like Kentucky Fried Movie or something like that, where it's just, an hour and a half of nonstop silliness and you're laughing at yourself in spite of the fact that you're laughing at the silliness.
I am a huge fan of the Super Mario Brothers movie.
Okay.
I adore UHF. I think the Naked Gun movies are some of the best comedies of the 80s. I mean, I'm all about the silly when I'm in the mood for it. Mm-hmm. I have no shame in that department.
But I guess there's some people that, they have to take it too seriously.
I guess, and again, movie forums being what they are, everybody wants to think they're the next big brain when it comes to film criticism. And I was guilty of that myself at the times. Mm-hmm. But I always try to approach the fact that this probably has an audience. I want to find who that audience would be. And there were some times, like for me, a 5-star movie was, this movie completely changed the way I look at the world. Mm-hmm. I gave out a few of those because sometimes I was like, wow, somebody did something genuinely new and different here. Didn't happen often, but when it happens, like, okay, I'll admit it. This was something new and different.
Do you have like a top 3 favorite movies or top 3 favorite actors?
It shifts around a lot, but I would say if I had to start claiming some stuff, I would always put Ghostbusters in that list somewhere. I would put Big Fish in that list somewhere. After that, something like maybe Blade Runner.
That's an interesting combination. I didn't know till recently that with Ghostbusters that Dan Aykroyd's grandfather, I think, had a strong belief in the supernatural and they were going after ghosts. And I think that kind of inspired the creation of the movie.
I would believe that. I hadn't heard that, but it would make some sense.
They said there were a couple of other parts that, because I don't think that the cast was originally as intended as it was.
No.
Was Eddie Murphy, I think, supposed to be in it? And Belushi, I think.
I know they probably, Belushi for sure, because he actually had a very strong role in what ended up happening. The ghost that we call Slimer nowadays was originally supposed to be the ghost of John Belushi. Mm-hmm. Because, they had really wanted him. They couldn't get him, but they just thought, hey, it's this big green slob. Yeah, that's John Belushi there. And it was, they originally didn't necessarily have a 4th character. They brought in the character of Winston to be kind of the everyman who could kind of explain what was going on. And then found out a little bit too late that Peter Venkman served to be just as good in that regard. So Winston became an almost unnecessary character, and that's unfortunate because Ernie Hudson is a really good actor.
I'd read that they were going to give him like a more of a backstory, that he was supposed to be like some sort of a military hero or something like that, but then they scrapped it, and that was why some of his screen time was cut down.
That would make sense. There's a lot of stuff that was probably bandied about. Thankfully, if you watch the TV show, that makes up for it a little bit. Winston does get a lot of screen time in that. Originally, the show was going to be set in space. Originally, the Ecto-1 was going to be black. Almost everything changed from what it was originally. But when I say originally, these may have been ideas that were just thrown around at the beginning during the first few drafts of the script. They weren't necessarily things that were intended to be shot, or even they didn't have to set up characters cast at the time. Mm-hmm. But there were a lot of ideas that were just thrown around because it could be, this movie was just going to be funny no matter what.
Now, do you think with the recent release of the Ghostbusters movie, do you think that it's come full circle and that should be that?
I think that they're going to keep trying to bring Ghostbusters back because they've been trying to bring it back for so long. Mm-hmm. I have one of my DVDs from the early 2000s actually has Ghostbusters 3 listed as being released in like 2004, which it obviously wasn't, but they were just so confident they were going to get it moving then that they actually put it in marketing materials of the time. That's how long they've been trying to get Ghostbusters back off the ground. Now that it's finally happened, I think it's going to be around for a while.
Now, are you a movie theater person or do you prefer streaming movies?
I prefer physical media if I have a choice. For me, the mark of a movie I think I'm going to like is I will just blind buy it, wait for that UHD to show up in the mail and just pop it in, because if I'm confident I like it, that's how I'd prefer to see a movie. I used to like going to the movie theaters. I still do, but it's just not practical for the world we live in right now.
Right. I mean, if there weren't COVID though, would you still be a movie theater fan, or you still like it from the comfort of home?
Well, it's hard to get I don't like going to the movie theater. I have a young child.
Okay.
Not all movies are appropriate for her. So it's like, I pick and choose when I want to go to the route of getting a sitter, finding the time. So that's why I said just ordering that movie, having it come, or sometimes streaming is good too. Sure. I do stream. So it's just, those are better solutions for me in the world right now.
I know it's funny because I talk to a lot of people who have like movie shows, and there's a lot of different views. And I guess because I'm older than a lot of the guests, I look at movie theaters differently. I don't go to the movies as much myself. I don't even really watch as many movies. Sometimes I'm streaming stuff, but I remember like when I was a lot younger, probably in like my late teens, that was always a great experience when you had that fantastic movie and just a theater full of people who were just laughing along or cheering along, whatever the movie was and whatever it called for. That was always like something that you'd really remember.
I can definitely relate to that. In fact, I had an experience like that just last month. I was on Star Trek The Cruise, and they did the premiere of season 2 of Picard on the ship at the time, because it was the same time that it was broadcasting out the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. And they actually put everything with a big theater. The whole ship crowded in there. And this was unique because the one they did the year prior, they had to do it over Zoom. They couldn't do a live premiere. So this was the first chance they got to really make a big splash with the premiere. And the excitement was, it produced such a weird energy in the ship, because people would be cheering and then they would suddenly get very quiet right away, because even though they wanted to express how glad they were to see it and how excited they were, they didn't want to miss anything.
Right.
You didn't want to miss a line of dialogue. You didn't want to miss a beat. So you would clap, you would yippee, and then you had to be quiet right away. And that was palpable.
I can imagine. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the Hungry Trilobyte now. Now, how many shows have you done so far?
120 some, depend. I have to check my queue, but yeah, I'm heading up on 130 right about now.
Okay. And it'll be more by the time that this will have aired.
I would think so.
Were there any special guests or memorable moments for you in doing your podcast?
It's hard to pick favorites, because every guest that you see represents somebody that I said specifically, I want a chance to work with that person, and I made it happen somehow or other. Mm-hmm. But I would say one of the coolest moments I had in the recent past was having Billy Mays III on. And, he's a very talented alternative musician. We got to talking about comic books, and I didn't really want to get into, I didn't want to just say, hey, your dad was famous for selling soap and that was cool. Your dad's a meme. I didn't want to do that. That's not
right.
me.
Right.
But he brought it up. And then suddenly we ended up having a pretty significant discussion on what it's like to go through loss and grief, and then to turn that around to something, to use that to funnel creativity, him with his music, me with the writing. It's like, okay, suddenly you're looking at it as a way to grow in a way that you don't necessarily want to grow, but you're going to have to. Mm-hmm. And getting that kind of conversation unexpectedly was a pretty cool moment.
Wow. Yeah, that does sound pretty amazing. So you said that you don't like to talk about your future guests because you want to wait till it's on paper. And I can respect that. Don't worry, I'm not twisting your arm here, Aaron.
Well, by now, you're going to see a great conversation with Dr. Mohammed Noor, who is the dean at Duke University, the dean of sciences, biology. He is an evolutionary biologist. And what we get together about is he was on the cruise I just mentioned. And we get into a lot of discussions on what would life on other planets be like? How does that theoretical possibility benefit us in this world now, looking at life on this planet? And bear in mind, I have a bachelor's degree in computer science. I am not nearly qualified to speak on any of these topics, but I read a lot. I am a curious layperson who can put two words together. So I try to drag this out as best I can. And he's a very gracious guy with a great sense of humor. And I strongly encourage you to go back and look at that episode too.
That sounds like a pretty interesting one too. Do you listen to a lot of other podcasts, or do you kind of stick with your own stuff? I know some people have different views on it. Some people say, I don't want to be influenced by other podcasts and I want to just kind of do my own thing and stay on my own path. And other people just kind of like, well, I can listen to something and not really have it affect me.
I would say you should be influenced by other podcasts. You should know what's out there. You should know what your peers are doing. If for no other reason, you have to know how to put your own spin on it. You have to know why you like this and why you want to either recreate it, avoid it, copy it, rip it off, whatever you have. The word why is really important. I like the Completely Unnecessary podcast with Pat Contry and Egan Ferguson. They've got a great spin on a lot of retro gaming knowledge as well as some general pop culture. And I just think that their approach to topics tends to be very even-handed, even if they get a little silly during the more heated episodes. I like pretty much anything by Dan Carlin, especially hardcore history. Mm-hmm. He was one of my earliest influences when it comes to podcasting. He was an advocate of the platform as a whole. He came from a radio background and was very good at articulating how podcasting was better than the traditional radio distribution model. And, for somebody who's just discovering it, and there's not many podcasts out there, that was a really great introduction for me, for somebody who had been down that road and said, no, this is better, even though it's new, it's unproven, nobody knows what about it. Because nobody knew about podcasting back in 2007.
It's still a secret to some people too. You notice that?
Yes.
Tell people I have a podcast, and of course you get the inevitable, what's a podcast? And how do I listen to this? Are you on the radio? No, I'm not on the radio.
Well, and it's this problem because there are so many podcasting platforms and they all have their pluses and minuses. It's hard to give somebody one specific link and have them go find the podcast on the platform they would like. I know if I give my Apple link to an Android user, they're going to have some trouble with it.
Right.
Somebody's got to figure that problem out.
we need universality in this. Mm-hmm. And money. That's always a plus.
I mean, I use my Linktree link a lot. And I really like just using the RSS feed and plugging that into my reader of choice. Mm-hmm. But that's more tech savvy than a lot of people want to be. And I respect that.
Right.
I have a big respect for I wanted to just push a button and work mentality, because that's the way things get better.
Okay, so we have this portion of the show, and it is called Shameless Self-Promotion.
Shameless Self-Promotion.
And this is where you can let everybody know how they can get in touch with you and follow you and check out your show.
Absolutely. You can find me on any podcast platform you're looking for. It's Hungry Trilobyte, Byte spelled BYTE, like the computer term. I'm also on YouTube, and you can track me down on my website, aaronbossig.com, or on Twitter at Aaron Bossig.
All right, there you have it. Aaron Bossig, he is the host and creator of The Hungry Trilobyte. And we want to make sure that none of you are watching movies where somebody's wheelchair gets hit. And that's not good. But Aaron, thank you for coming on the show.
It's been a pleasure, Jim. Thanks so much.
We're on that internet thingy at Sherpalution.com.
Oh, wait a minute. Now, you didn't think that you were going to get through this podcast without hearing that music, did you? Well, of course not, because it is time for Sherpa Samples. And this is the portion of the show where I sample episodes of various podcasts that are out there in Podcastia and relay it back to you what they're all about. Because I know sometimes there's a lot to look at and you're like, do I want this one? What's this one about? Stuff like that. So I figured, well, I'm a Sherpa. I got a guide. So here we are. Now, a little bit of background about this week's selections. Last week, I did a lot of eponymous podcasts, podcasts with people's names in it. And I know people listen and they say, well, what's this person about? What kind of show does he do? And, we spoke about that. But I had noticed when I was done compiling my list and listening to the 10 episodes that I usually listen to, that there weren't that many women podcasters on that list. So I said, well, we have to rectify this situation. So this week, nothing but women podcasts, Rebels. Nothing but women podcasts. Now, there are some that I am definitely not the intended target audience. I can tell you that right off the bat. I guess that's a little bit obvious, but there were some that I really enjoyed, and I'm going to get to those as well. You know, it's not my position here to critique these, whether they're good or bad. I mean, that is going to be up to you. Everybody likes different types of podcasts. And, you know, I'm just kind of giving you some titles to check out that I've listened to. Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay, so let's get started. Some of the ones that really aren't directed towards maybe an old Sherpa like me. So we have Off the Vine with Caitlin Bristow. Now, Caitlin Bristow was a contestant on The Bachelor, and then she was The Bachelorette. She interviewed someone, and I forgot who it was that she interviewed. I think it was somebody who was on Dancing with the Stars. That's right. It just didn't really seem to be up my alley, but maybe it might be something that you like. It's an interview format. She does a good job of it. Just, I was never really a big fan of The Bachelor or The Bachelorette. No offense to Caitlin. I'm sure she's a very lovely person, and maybe she's found her happiness, I hope. And also there is Not Skinny, Not Fat with Amanda Hirsch. Now, Amanda had this show on Instagram, and it got very popular. So she made a podcast out of it. And I know she interviewed Kim Kardashian not too long ago, and she was very excited about that. And I guess she talks to a lot of influencers and other people on social media and whomever else might come along. A good interviewer. Again, probably I'm not the intended audience, so I can't really say too much else about it, but it's definitely a show worth checking out. And of course, there were the dating shows, and there is Call Her Daddy, which is exclusive to Spotify, and that's hosted by a lady named Alex Cooper. It's a dating and sex talk show. It could be a little raunchy. She's entertaining. She's very honest. They call her Daddy because he's one of the founding fathers of, I guess, this type of podcast. So they refer to her as Father Cooper. That's what explains the title. So it's definitely a unique approach for a podcast. And also in the dating vein, we have Why Won't You Date Me? And that is by Nicole Byer. And she is a comedian, and she's in the Team Coco network. So hopefully she's now on Sirius XM and making some nice money with Conan O'Brien. Again, it's a dating show. She's very funny. She could be a little raunchy, but that's okay. And Nicole Byer, why won't I date you? Well, let me see. I would have to not be married. I'd have to be a lot younger. I would have to be somewhat good looking. I'd have to have some sort of talent, and probably have the money of Conan O'Brien. And actually, yeah, we'll just... maybe the talent thing will be, I don't know, maybe that'll be a deal breaker. Also, there are podcasts about women's history. We have to do a little thing about history podcasts, but here were two very good ones. One was called Encyclopedia Womanica, and that's a lot of different stories about women in history. And it was very brief, but informative and interesting. And from the How Stuff Works category, there's a podcast called Stuff You Missed in History Class, and that's hosted by Holly and Tracy. Again, very interesting. They talked about microwave ovens and chocolate chip cookies in this episode and how they came to be, and really interesting stuff. Definitely two likable hosts. If you like history and little items of minutia, this is definitely a great history podcast to be checking out. Also, I think many of you know who Susie Orman is. She's got a podcast called Susie Orman's Women and Money, and she talks a lot about the financial world, of course, and she takes a lot of listener questions. And, you know, I was reading the reviews, and they said that she had kind of a condescending tone, but I don't know. If someone's giving you financial advice, don't you want them to be a little condescending, like they know what they're talking about, not just wishy-washy and say, well, maybe you could do this. I didn't find her tone condescending at all. I thought it was very interesting and very knowledgeable. You do not have to be a woman to listen to this podcast. It's really geared towards men and women, but that's her target audience, and that's cool. And also, one that was pretty cool was Murder, Mystery, and Makeup. And that's by Bailey Sarian. And Bailey is an actual makeup artist. And this is based on a YouTube show where she's applying makeup and talking about true crime. And I read on Google that they said that she's considered the pioneer of true crime makeup podcasts. I didn't even know there was a type of true crime makeup podcast. But I got to tell you, I listened to the podcast. I wasn't really concerned with the makeup or anything like that. And I really enjoyed Bailey's delivery. And it's kind of like she's talking to you as a friend and really explaining things and telling you the stories of things that went on, whether it's murders, kidnappings, so on and so forth. She also hosts a podcast called Dark History, which I don't think is on YouTube, but Murder, Mystery, and Makeup is on YouTube. And also there was Tell Me, which is hosted by Ellen Pompeo. Now, Ellen Pompeo is an actress who's been on the TV show Grey's Anatomy. And the episode that I caught was an interview with Martha Stewart. And I really enjoyed the show. I thought Ellen really holds her own as an interviewer. And she's very down to earth, not really too Hollywood type. Just seems like a regular person. And I guess she talks to a lot of close friends and stuff like that. And she comes across as very relatable. So it's definitely a podcast worth checking out as well. Finally, this one was such a pleasant surprise, even for myself. You know, usually when you listen to podcasts about TV shows, it helps if you've watched the TV show. Now, there's been a TV show that was popular in England and in the United States called The Office. The British version was with Ricky Gervais, and the American version starred Steve Carell. Now, this podcast is called Office Ladies, and it's hosted by Jenna Fisher and Angela Kinsey, who were in the show. And, you know, I've never seen an episode of either one of them, but the enthusiasm and the passion that they have in talking about the show really intrigued me to maybe want to check the show out one day if I actually get the opportunity to sit down and watch TV when I'm not putting together podcasts. They gave a lot of behind the scenes stories and what they were going through and how they interacted with the cast members. I listened to the very first episode and I really enjoyed it. Their back and forth, the give and take is like perfectly balanced. Neither one of the two dominates the conversation. It's a real great balance between these two ladies. They're both very talented. They're very funny as well. If you are a fan of the TV show The Office, I know there's this one and it's very enjoyable. And there's also one hosted by a guy named Brian Baumgartner, who I believe is also in the show, and it's called The Office Deep Dive. So you got two podcasts about The Office if you enjoy that TV show. Maybe I may one day. I don't know. But now that I've enjoyed all of that, it's time to head into the outro. A very special thanks to today's guest, Aaron Bossig of the Hungry Trilobyte. Aaron, thanks so much for swinging by. It was nice to finally get to know you face to face. And thank you all for tuning in and listening. And you know what? If you're liking this show, can you do me a favor? Leave me a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or maybe even Spotify. Yeah, and even if you don't like the podcast, do the same thing. Confuse your enemies. That's what I say. Confuse your enemies. You can follow us on social media, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Sherpalution. And you want to remember that Sherpalution word because Sherpalution.com is the website where things are happening. All the episodes are there, and you have links to merchandise, and some other projects I've been working on. And even if you want to make a little donation, just out of pity. Yes, I'll take pity money. That's fine. I don't know. But again, thank you all for tuning in. New episodes every Wednesday. I'll be here in whatever podcast app you're on, or if you want to listen on Sherpalution.com, I'll be there also. So until next time, folks, me and Mr. Bruce would like to wish you a happy Viva la Sherpalution.
Thanks for listening to Too Many Podcasts. Please disperse. You can go home now. I said you can go home now. Viva la Sherpalution. Viva la Sherpalution. Yo, come back now, you hear?